And as Taiwan-China tensions escalate and an invasion looms, we welcome geopolitical analyst Don McLain Gill to discuss its potential impact in the Philippines. Good evening and welcome to The Big Story. First of all, what do you see as the message China is trying to send Taiwan with these massive military exercises?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to come back and to discuss this. Now, looking beyond China, as we can clearly see that China's expansionist ambitions would not stop at Taiwan, but basically it is trying to set a narrowly driven exclusionary policy throughout the greater Western Hemisphere, or rather the Western Pacific, in relation to its great power ambitions. But let's go back to what General Bronner said, and this is very important. A statement coming from the chief of the AFP at a time when the PLAN is seen to be creeping closer to the main island of Taiwan and, of course, its smaller outlying islands through military drills such as the one that is currently undergoing. Now, the level of vigilance and responsiveness of our military in that regard is commendable to prepare based on the evolving realities, not just of the greater Western Pacific, but also the first island chain.
Yes, but what preparations can we do? The Philippines is not exactly spending much for its defense. Well, perhaps let's look at Batanes to begin with. What can the military do in terms of preparing for such an eventuality?
Right. So, by virtue of geography, our treaty alliance with the United States, and of course, the presence of over 200,000 OFWs in Taiwan, whatever takes place there would have direct ramifications for our security interests. So, what we are currently seeing is that we are more attentive. Our armed forces, our Coast Guard, are more attentive to the developments that are unfolding to our north, north of the Luzon Strait as well. The Philippines, along with our ally and partners, are aware of this very interdependent security challenge, one connecting our northern regions to the West Philippine Sea. So, in that regard, we have seen a number of important developments in the past 2 years alone, from expanding EDCA sites to the north, and of course, the creation of the PCG station last year in Batanes. We are also looking at special operations, advanced special operations between the Philippines and the United States in Batanes as well, as mentioned in the joint statement between Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Teodoro. And of course, you also look at the 2025 Balikatan exercises, which also focuses on enhancing preparedness and interoperability cooperation between the Philippines and the United States using new and high-end weapon systems such as the Nemesis, which is crucial for coastal defense because of its accuracy in targeting moving maritime assets. The Philippine Navy will also be using 3 major weapon systems in order for test firing as well. So in that regard, these are steps that are used in order to enhance preparedness. We're also working with our other like-minded partners like Japan, who is also positioned critically in the first island chain. So in that regard, what the Philippines is doing right now is crucial. What the military is doing is crucial. What the Coast Guard is doing is crucial and would require more continuity and consistent political will. Because clearly, when we look into China's behavioral pattern, it would not stop from Taiwan, right? It would not stop just by overtaking Taiwan. It would continue as it pushes forward. So in that regard, we are at the bridge. We are at the crux of this overarching expansionist ambitions of China. So in that regard, we have to be clear on how we would intend to set up our position in this regard.
Speaking of clarity, Don, I wanted to pick your brain about this because we know about this blockade, and that's the best way for China to try to block off Taiwan. We know they have roughly a schedule before 2027, so we are able to prepare. But today, the commander of the Eastern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army, he actually kind of admitted that this is a blockade rehearsal, and it's kind of jarring for me hearing that he's so blasé about admitting it. Do you notice that this is an escalation in the messaging, or are we reading too much into it?
No, no, absolutely. And I think that the statement by General Bronner is, in fact, very proactive. We can see that China has been quite nonchalant about its ambitions to invade Taiwan. And in fact, the military drills that have been taking place by the PLAN uh, since 2023 have actually been creeping closer and closer to the mainland of Taiwan, to the point that they actually seem like they are practicing or rehearsing for potential potential invasion plan. So in that regard, of course, we can clearly see that China has the intent, and it has been quite determined in pursuing this objective. And of course, the objective won't stop there, as I have mentioned earlier. No amount of political appeasement will be able to address the adventurous ambitions of China. So therefore, it is important to look at that and not to overstate or not to understate, of course, the threat, but it's also important to look at China's military potential in an objective manner. Also, not to exaggerate China's military might. And this is why it is crucial for us, along with our ally, along with our partners, to ensure that we are able to collectively prepare. If you look at South Korea, for instance, China has also begun indulging in unilateral actions at the West Sea, right?
Right.
And this is, of course, one of the recent developments this year. It has also been trying to emulate what it is doing in the West Philippine Sea when it comes to East Asia or Northeast Asia. So in that regard, we can see how everything, if you try to connect the dots, there are, of course, a number of determinants that show that gray zone in itself also would have its limitations before it eventually turns into kinetic warfare. So in that regard, we have to prepare, and that's what our armed forces are doing.
Well, during his speech, Don, you have General Browner talking about the evolving nature of warfare. As you mentioned, aside from traditional kinetic warfare, he also pointed out cyber information, cognitive, and political warfare. Just help us understand what he meant by that and help us give context to it.
Absolutely. So, the disinformation, malign information operations that we have been talking about, this is what you may understand as the tip of China's gray zone sphere, or rather, its gray zone sphere. So, in this regard, we can see how China is trying to bend the Filipinos' will. And of course, also the political will of Malacanang, and of course, our political leadership, and at the same time, to ensure that it sets the conditions for public unrest through the proliferation of social media articles or posts with the use of technological developments such as AI to portray, for instance, the Philippines as the country that is provoking the situation, or in another instance, the Philippines as being a puppet or proxy of someone else in that regard, to show that what the Philippines is doing is not, in fact, based on the interests of how the Philippines should pursue its engagements in the region. So these are the sort of provocations that China has been doing for the past few years. And in fact, it has been increasing and will continue to increase as the midterm elections would come in. So this is the usual train of thought. This is the usual narrative that China tries to position itself in within the public consciousness. And of course, with these statements coming from our leadership, we're bound to expect some disinformation trends of PRC propagandists stating that the Philippines wants to provoke the situation, etc., etc. This is based on the national interests of the Philippines, and what it is doing right now is clearly based on its national objectives as well. It's that level of agency that we need to appreciate.
Should we have the DFA becoming more, vocal, as our chief of staff in his speech today? They barely hold, press briefings the way China does, for instance.
Well, that's true. I mean, the way China has been acting is, of course, in a way that clearly recognizes what its long term ambitions would be in the region. But as far as our government agencies are concerned, if you look into the National Security Council, the National Maritime Council, National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea, if we look into the Department of Defense, these are various agencies that have been actually quite proactive in that positioning. And of course, when we look at the DFA, they have also been doing an important job in, of course, facilitating the right conditions for bilateral consultation mechanisms, for instance. And this is important in showing that the Philippines is in fact trying to open or continues to open lines of communication, but at the same time, we are also giving them the signal that the Philippines would not stand idle in the face of Chinese coercion. So in that regard, of course, there has to be a little bit of balance based on the mandates of these agencies. But if you look into what is taking place on the ground, we are clearly seeing that the Philippines is recognizing its position as a stakeholder of stability in the region. So in that regard, we have to look into these critical, examples that I mentioned earlier, where the Philippines has actually been proactive enough to set the tone
Okay.
for regional cooperation, not as a proxy, but as a clear element in of stability in the region. So this is in fact very important, but
And
something that
lastly,
yeah.
Gil, if I may interrupt you, lastly and briefly, I hope, the economic impact, especially as we have 250,000 OFWs in Taiwan, the economic impact that will be felt by the Philippines by this escalation of hostilities.
Well, clearly, there would be an economic, a socio-economic impact. And of course, that is one of the aspects of our multi-aligned cooperation today, where we are trying to ensure that we can revitalize our economic cooperation, diversify supply chain networks, etc. But of course, as we plan on the military and defense front, this is one of the important challenges that we would have to overcome as well. And this would also involve improving our national economic environment to ensure that we are able to maximize whatever we can in the near future as the geo-economic situation continues to complicate in the long term.
We thank you so much for your time. That was geopolitical analyst Don McLain Gill.